The paper in your hand feels worn already, though you've only been holding it for a few hours. You've folded it and unfolded it dozens of times, checking and rechecking the details printed in small practical type. Third class, White Star Line, RMS Titanic, Southampton to New York, April 10th, 1912. It cost you nearly everything, £7 and 5 shillings, almost 2 months' wages, saved carefully, coin by coin. The ticket is simultaneously nothing and everything, a rectangle of paper that represents your entire future, your dreams of America, of opportunity untold. The harbor at Southampton stretches before you like a forest of masts and funnels, the morning air thick with coal smoke and salt. You stand among hundreds of others, your worldly possessions packed into a simple case or bundle. Some around you speak your language, many do not. There are Irish accents, Italian phrases, Swedish conversations, all blending together in a tapestry of hope and anticipation. Children cling to their mothers' skirts. Men in worn caps smoke nervously. The line moves with excruciating slowness, each step forward bringing you closer to the massive hull that dominates the horizon. The Titanic is impossibly large. Your eyes struggle to take in its entirety. The 4 massive funnels reaching toward the sky, the endless rows of portholes, the sheer black and white wall of her hull, stretching what seems like miles into the distance. You've never seen anything man-made of such proportions. It's difficult to believe something so massive could ever move, let alone cross an entire ocean. The ship dwarfs the people gathered below, making even the wealthiest first-class passengers seem small and insignificant as they board via their separate gangway, their trunks and hat boxes carried by porters in uniforms. Your gangway is different. It's at the stern, unmarked and utilitarian, leading not to the promenade decks you've seen in the promotional photographs, but somewhere else entirely, somewhere below, somewhere inside. The line inches forward. The immigration officer barely glances at you before waving you through. A White Star Line employee examines your ticket with practiced efficiency, his eyes already moving to the person behind you before you've even stepped away. Medical inspection, someone says in accented English, pointing to a small queue forming to the side. This wasn't mentioned in the brochure that convinced you to book passage. The doctor's examination is quick, impersonal. He looks at your eyes, in your mouth, checks your scalp for lice. His hands are cold. You're marked with chalk, passed, healthy enough for America, and directed toward the gangway. Your heart beats faster with each step up the wooden planking. The ship creaks slightly, though whether from the breeze or the weight of passengers boarding, you cannot tell. The entrance for third-class passengers is narrow, utilitarian, no polished wood, no brass fixtures, just steel, painted a practical white. The corridors seem to close in immediately, the ceiling low enough that taller men must duck slightly. The air is different inside, warmer, heavy, with the smell of new paint, machine oil, and too many bodies in too small a space. A steward, in a simple uniform, not nearly as fine as those you glimpsed directing the first-class passengers, checks your ticket again and consults a manifest. E-deck, he says, pointing to a narrow staircase leading down. Follow the corridor to the stern. Men's quarters on the port side. You nod, though you're not entirely certain which way is port. You follow others who seem to know where they're going, descending deeper into the vessel, each step taking you further from the open air and sunlight above. The staircase is steep, utilitarian, nothing like the grand staircase you've heard mentioned in hushed, reverent tones by those who've glimpsed illustrations of the ship's first-class accommodations. The steps are metal, the handrails simple pipes, painted white like everything else. Each footfall echoes against the steel, joining the cacophony of hundreds of other passengers finding their way through the labyrinthine lower decks. End deck. The corridor stretches before you, seemingly endless, splitting and branching in confusing ways. Doors line both sides, each marked with numbers but no names. People press past you, speaking languages you don't understand, their faces showing the same mixture of confusion, excitement, and anxiety you feel twisting in your stomach. Children cry. A woman argues with a steward about a lost bag. The air grows noticeably thicker as you descend, warmer, tinged with the smell of the engines thrumming somewhere even deeper in the ship's belly. Your assigned cabin is small, painfully so. 6 berths, narrow metal frames with thin mattresses, are stacked 3 high against the walls. 5 other men will share this space with you for the next week. 2 are already there, claiming bottom bunks, arranging their meager possessions in the limited space beneath. There are no portals, no windows to the outside world. The only light comes from a single electric bulb in the ceiling, harsh and unflattering. The walls are white steel, the floor a practical linoleum. There is nothing soft about the space, nothing that doesn't serve a strictly practical purpose. You claim one of the middle bunks, not wanting to climb to the highest level, but understanding instinctively that the bottom berths were the most desirable. Your case slides underneath your roommate's bed. The mattress is thin, the pillow thinner. You sit on the edge, feeling the frame creak under your weight. The ceiling is close enough that you can reach up and touch it without fully extending your arm. When the other men arrive, a bearded Russian, 2 Irish brothers traveling together, and a quiet German, the room shrinks further, filled with the smell of bodies, of tobacco, of anxious excitement. There's a small wash basin in the corner, a single tap that offers only cold water. The toilet facilities, you're told by one of the Irish brothers who explored while waiting to depart, are down the hall, shared by dozens of other passengers. There's a single bathtub for all of third class, though the likelihood of getting a turn during the 7-day crossing seems remote at best. The ship's horn sounds so loud that the walls around you seem to vibrate with its force. The floor beneath your feet shudders, almost imperceptibly at first, then with greater intensity. The engines, massive and unseen, have been brought to life. Through the steel walls, you hear the distant sound of cheers from those on the decks above, those fortunate enough to wave goodbye to England from the open air. Here in the bowels of the ship, departure is experienced differently, felt rather than seen, a vibration in your bones rather than a visual unfolding of shoreline falling away. Hours pass slowly. You and your cabin mates establish an uneasy familiarity, communicating through gesture and broken phrases of shared language. The Russian has vodka in a flask that he offers around. The German has a small worn Bible that he reads silently. The Irish brothers play cards, teaching you a game whose rules you only partially understand. Time blurs into itself, marked only by the increasing distance from shore and the gradual settling of the ship into its rhythm of forward motion. Hunger eventually drives you from the cramped cabin. You navigate the corridors again, following signs and other passengers toward the third-class dining saloon. The space is larger than you expected, with long tables arranged in rows, bolted to the floor, benches rather than chairs, white tablecloths, surprisingly clean, steel utensils, sturdy plates. The room is already crowded, filled with the sound of hundreds of conversations in dozens of languages, the clatter of plates, the occasional laugh or cry of a child. The stewards direct you to an empty spot at one of the tables. You sit beside a Polish family, mother, father, 3 small children with solemn eyes and clean faces. Across from you, an elderly couple who might be Greek or Turkish, their hands work-worn and spotted with age. None of you can communicate beyond nods and polite smiles. The meal is served in courses, though not with the elegance you imagine is happening simultaneously in the first-class dining saloon. Soup first, vegetable, lukewarm but filling, then boiled potatoes, a piece of fish, bread with a pat of butter. It's simple food, plain but plentiful, more than many had in the lives they've left behind. After dinner, some passengers make their way to the third-class general room, a space designated for socializing. There's a piano there, you've heard, and sometimes music. But you're tired from the day's excitement, from the emotional weight of departure, from the constant low-level anxiety of navigating this new, strange environment. You return to your cabin instead, finding your way through the maze-like corridors that all look identical in their white steel uniformity. Night falls, though you wouldn't know it. In your windowless cabin, time becomes theoretical, marked only by the ship's bells and your own sense of fatigue. Your cabin mates prepare for bed with minimal conversation, each establishing their territory in the cramped space. The upper bunk creaks as its occupant shifts position. The Russian snores almost immediately. One of the Irish brothers prays quietly in Latin or Gaelic, you can't be sure which. The German reads his Bible by the dim light of the single bulb before the steward comes to enforce lights out. In darkness, the ship's sounds become more pronounced. The constant vibration of the engines, the groaning of metal expanding and contracting, water rushing past the hull, though you're too deep inside the vessel to hear it directly. Footsteps in the corridor outside, someone coughing in the next cabin, a child crying somewhere distant, a couple arguing in hushed, urgent tones. The symphony of hundreds of lives packed tightly together, separated only by thin walls of painted steel. Your narrow bed feels both confining and unsteady. Each roll of the ship, barely perceptible during daylight hours, seems magnified in the darkness. Your body hasn't found its sea legs yet. The ceiling hovers close above you, a steel sky that reminds you with every glance upward of how deep inside this vessel you are, how far below the open air and starlight. You calculate the layers between you and the surface, your bunk, the ceiling, FA deck above you, G deck above that, then the main deck, then finally, sky. Too many layers, too much weight pressing down. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds and sensations. Dreams blend with reality. The ship's creaking transforms into voices. The distant thrum of engines becomes a heartbeat too loud to ignore. You wake often, momentarily confused about where you are, reaching for walls that should be there but aren't, before remembering the Titanic, third class, E-deck, somewhere in the English Channel now, moving steadily toward Cherbourg, France, where more passengers will board. Morning arrives without sunlight, marked only by increased activity in the corridors and the smell of breakfast being prepared in the kitchens far above. Your cabin mates stir, performing abbreviated toilets at the small basin. The queue for the shared bathroom facilities stretches down the corridor, men in various states of dishevelment, waiting with resigned patience. You join them, towel and soap clutched in hand, already understanding that privacy is a luxury not afforded to those who paid for third-class passage. The ship stops at Cherbourg in the late afternoon, though again you experience this only as a gradual cessation of the engine's vibration and a new influx of passengers navigating the corridors with wide-eyed uncertainty that mirrors your own from just hours before. French voices now join the international chorus in the dining saloon that evening. The third class is nearly at capacity. Over 700 passengers shared between you, all harboring similar dreams of what awaits across the Atlantic. Night falls again. The ship departs for Queenstown Island, its final stop before the long Atlantic crossing. Tomorrow will bring the last new faces, the last connection to European soil. Then, nothing but ocean for days. You lie in your narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling inches from your face, and try to imagine the distance yet to be traveled. Try to picture the America waiting on the other side. Try not to think about how deep in the ship you are, how many tons of steel and water surround you, how completely your life is now in the hands of this massive vessel and the men who operate her. The ticket that brought you here sits folded in your case, beneath the bed. Third class, White Star Line, RMS Titanic, Southampton to New York, April 10th, 1912. The most important purchase of your life, your passage to a new world, your ticket to the American dream, your passage through the water, your passage to what waits beyond, whatever that might be. Dawn breaks unseen on your second day aboard the Titanic, your consciousness stirring not to sunlight, but to the sounds of your cabin mates shifting in their narrow berths. The air in the cabin has grown thick overnight, heavy with the mingled breath of 6 men in close quarters. The German is the first to rise, moving with practiced efficiency in the small space, careful not to disturb the others more than necessary. The Irish brothers follow, whispering to each other in their shared language. The Russian remains motionless, his snores having continued uninterrupted through the night. You lie still for a moment, orienting yourself. The constant vibration of the engines has become almost imperceptible now, fading into the background of your awareness like a heartbeat. The ship rolls slightly, a gentle rhythmic motion that reminds you of being rocked as a child. Through the steel walls, you hear the muffled sounds of life stirring throughout your deck, doors opening and closing, feet in the corridors, voices calling to one another in a dozen languages. The floor is cold against your bare feet when you finally rise. Your clothes from yesterday are wrinkled, but you have precious few alternatives packed in your small case. You'll wear them again today, as will most of your fellow passengers in third class. Wardrobes are limited when your entire life must fit into a single piece of luggage, small enough to store beneath a stranger's bed. The line for the shared bathroom facilities stretches even longer this morning. You wait your turn, towel and soap in hand, making fleeting eye contact with the men around you, all strangers united by circumstance, by class, by the shared indignity of this morning ritual. When your turn finally comes, you wash quickly, conscious of those still waiting. The water is cold, bracing. The soap lathers poorly. The towel is thin and already damp from previous use, but you emerge feeling marginally more human than before. Breakfast in the third-class dining saloon is a simple affair: porridge, slightly overcooked and bland, bread with jam, tea that scalds your tongue. The tables are crowded, stewards moving efficiently between them, serving with practice motions that suggest years of experience, catering to passengers who expect little and are rarely disappointed in that expectation. You find yourself seated with a different group than last night, a family from Lebanon, you think, though communication is limited to smiles and gestures. Their children stare at you with undisguised curiosity, while their mother gently scolds them in a language of soft consonants and flowing vowels. After breakfast, With no obligations to fill your day, you explore the spaces allocated to third-class passengers. The general room is larger than you imagined, with wooden benches along the walls and a few scattered tables where passengers have already gathered to play cards or checkers. A piano stands in one corner, unattended for now. The space is well below the waterline, like all third-class accommodations, but portholes high on one wall offer tantalizing glimpses of grey-blue sea rushing past, punctuated by occasional sprays of white foam. An Irish youth has brought out a fiddle and begins to play a jaunty tune. Others join in. Someone produces a tin whistle, another an accordion, and impromptu dancing breaks out in the cleared center of the room. Children clap their hands in delight. An elderly woman taps her foot in time with the music. For a moment, the cramped conditions, the stale air, the uncertainty of the journey fade away, replaced by this unexpected joy, this spontaneous community forming among strangers. You wander further, finding your way through a maze of identical corridors to one of the small spaces on the boat deck designated for third-class use. The fresh air hits your lungs like a revelation after the recycled atmosphere below. The sky stretches endlessly above, a vast blue canvas dotted with scattered clouds. The wind carries salt spray that mists your face. You grip the railing, feeling the power of the ocean rushing past, watching the wake stretch behind the ship like a road traveled that can never be retraced. Other third-class passengers have found their way here too, their faces turned upward to the sun like flowers seeking light after too long in shadow. A young couple leans against the railing, their shoulders touching, pointing at something in the distance, perhaps a seabird, perhaps another ship on the horizon, perhaps nothing at all, but the promise of what waits across the water. Children run in circles, released from the confines of the lower decks, their energy uncontainable. An old man sits on a bench, pipe clenched between his teeth, eyes closed in quiet contemplation. Your time on deck is limited by both written and unwritten rules. The majority of the promenade spaces are reserved for first and second class passengers, their territory marked by signs, and occasionally by crew members who politely but firmly redirect those who stray beyond their designated areas. You watch as a family in fine clothes strolls past on the upper deck, a world away though separated by only a few yards of vertical space. A young girl in a white dress with a blue sash looks down and waves hesitantly. You wave back before her mother notices and draws her attention elsewhere. The ship docks at Queenstown in the early afternoon. From your vantage point on the deck, you watch as the final passengers board, mostly Irish, their faces a mixture of hope and grief as they take their last steps on home soil. Tenders bring them from shore, small boats, against the massive hull of the Titanic. You wonder what they're thinking as they look up at this floating city of steel, this vessel that will carry them away from everything familiar toward an uncertain future. When the last tender pulls away, when the anchors are raised and the engines increase their tempo beneath your feet, there is a palpable shift in the atmosphere aboard ship. This is it, the beginning of the true journey. No more stops until New York Harbor. Nothing but ocean between here and there. You feel it in your chest. A tightening, a mixture of anticipation and dread that you notice reflected in the faces around you. You return below as the Irish coastline recedes into the distance, descending the narrow stairs back into the heart of the ship. The contrast between the open sky above and the confined spaces of E-deck is jarring. The air feels immediately thicker, warmer, tinged with the smells of too many bodies and not enough ventilation. The corridors seem narrower than before, the ceilings lower, the walls closer. Lunch in the dining saloon offers a brief distraction. Soup again, beef this time, with vegetables and more bread. You've noticed that food is one of the few topics that transcends language barriers among the passengers. Eyes light up at a well-prepared dish, shoulders slump at disappointment. Today's meal falls somewhere in between, nourishing but forgettable, fuel rather than pleasure. The afternoon stretches before you, a blank expanse of time to fill. Some passengers nap in their bunks, catching up on sleep, lost to unfamiliar surroundings and anxiety. Others gather in small groups, sharing stories or playing games. A religious service forms spontaneously in one corner of the general room, a cluster of passengers praying together in Latin, finding comfort in ancient words and shared faith. You find yourself drawn to a young man sketching portraits for a small fee, pencil on paper, quick but surprisingly accurate captures of hopeful faces. You watch as he renders a mother and child, his hands moving with practiced confidence across the page. When he notices your interest, he gestures for you to sit. You hesitate, then comply, holding still as his eyes move between your face and his paper. The finished portrait shows someone you recognize but don't entirely know, your features rendered truthfully, but somehow more dignified than you feel, more certain of purpose. "For America," he says in accented English, handing you the drawing. New life. You pay him the coins he asks for, tucking the portrait carefully into your jacket pocket, a record of who you were at this moment of between. No longer who you were before boarding, not yet who you will become on the other side. The dinner bell rings at 6 o'clock, calling third-class passengers back to the dining saloon. The evening meal is the most substantial of the day. Roast beef with potatoes, cabbage boiled until soft, rice pudding for dessert. Not the luxurious fare being served simultaneously in first class, but satisfying nonetheless. Conversation at the tables has grown more animated as passengers become familiar with one another, finding ways to communicate despite language barriers. Children run between the tables until stewards gently herd them back to their seats. The atmosphere is communal, unexpectedly warm, despite the institutional setting. After dinner, the general room transforms. Someone has claimed the piano, playing popular tunes that have passengers singing along in various languages, the melody uniting them, even as the words differ. The Irish contingent performs traditional dances, teaching steps to willing learners from Italy, Sweden, Lebanon. Alcohol appears from private stocks, forbidden but tolerated in moderation. Laughter fills the space, echoing off steel walls that seemed so cold and impersonal just hours before. You find yourself drawn into a card game with a group of men from different countries, the stakes small but the competition fierce. You lose a few coins and win others back, but the real value is in the camaraderie, in the universal language of play that needs no translation. A child falls asleep on her father's lap at the next table. An elderly couple dances slowly in one corner, their movements limited by age, but graceful with decades of practice together. As the hour grows late, passengers gradually return to their cabins. The corridors of E-deck echo with footsteps, with hushed conversations, with the occasional burst of laughter, quickly stifled out of consideration for those already sleeping. You make your way back to your small shared space, navigating the turns that are becoming familiar after just 2 days aboard. Your cabin mates are in various states of preparation for sleep. The Russian already snores on his bottom bunk. The German reads his Bible by the light of the single bulb. The Irish brothers play a final round of cards on one of their beds. You climb to your middle berth, removing only your shoes and jacket in the limited space, lying back on the thin mattress that has not grown more comfortable with familiarity. Night at sea has its own peculiar quality in the depths of the ship. The darkness is absolute when the lights are extinguished, unmitigated by moonlight or stars. The sounds intensify, the creaking of the hull as it works against the waves, the distant thrum of engines that never cease, the breathing of your cabin mates, the muffled voices from adjacent rooms. The air grows still, almost solid in its stillness, warmed by 6 bodies in close proximity. Sleep comes more easily than the night before, your body beginning to adapt to the rhythms of the ship, to the narrow confines of your berth. Your dreams are filled with water, sometimes peaceful, sometimes threatening, always vast and incomprehensible in its depth and power. You wake occasionally through the night, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where you are, how far below the surface, how much ocean surrounds you on all sides. Morning arrives as before, marked not by light, but by sound, by the gradual stirring of life throughout E-deck. The routine established yesterday repeats itself with minor variations. The line for the bathroom, the simple breakfast in the crowded dining saloon, the search for ways to occupy the hours that stretch between meals. The weather has turned during the night. When you make your way to the third-class deck space, you find it rain-washed and windswept. Few passengers brave the elements, most returning quickly to the shelter below. You linger longer than most, despite the discomfort, grateful for fresh air that hasn't been breathed by hundreds of others, for the sight of the horizon line where gray sea meets gray sky, for the reminder that there is a world beyond steel walls and narrow passageways. The days begin to blur together, each one indistinguishable from the last. The same foods appear on your plate at regular intervals. The same faces surround you in the general room. The same narrow berth awaits you each night. Only the subtle changes in the ship's movement suggest progress, the increasing rhythm of the engines as the Titanic reaches its cruising speed, the occasional new vibration or sound that prompts speculation among passengers about what it might mean. You establish small rituals to mark the passage of time. A morning visit to the deck, regardless of weather, a game of checkers with a Romanian man who speaks no English but smiles widely whether he wins or loses, a nightly count of the coins in your pocket, calculating how many will remain when you reach New York, planning how they might stretch until you find work. The ship's crew interacts with third-class passengers primarily through instruction and service, bringing meals, answering basic questions, maintaining order. They are neither unkind nor particularly attentive, simply performing their assigned duties with professional detachment. Occasionally, though, you witness small moments of humanity. A steward slipping an extra dessert to a wide-eyed child, a deckhand helping an elderly passenger navigate a difficult stairway, a kitchen worker teaching Italian words to an interested Irish youth during dinner service. Religious services become more organized as the journey continues. A Catholic priest traveling in second class obtains permission to conduct mass for third-class passengers. A Methodist minister does the same for Protestants. A small group of Jewish passengers observes their own traditions in a corner of the general room. For many, these familiar rituals provide comfort and continuity, a thread connecting their past lives to whatever awaits them across the water. You write a letter one afternoon, seated at a table in the general room. The paper is cheap, purchased from a steward for a penny. The pencil borrowed from the portrait artist. Your words feel inadequate to describe the experience. How can you explain the enormity of the ship, the strangeness of living below the waterline, the international community forming in this floating space between worlds? You write anyway, knowing the letter won't be mailed until you reach New York, knowing it will arrive long after you've disembarked, become a record of a moment already past. The nights grow colder as the ship moves further into the North Atlantic. The thin blankets provided prove inadequate against the chill that seems to radiate from the steel walls. Passengers wear their day clothes to bed, sometimes their coats as well. In your cabin, the German trading his wool socks to one of the Irish brothers in exchange for a knit cap, each seeking whatever small comfort might make sleep possible in the frigid air. Despite the discomforts, the cold, the cramped quarters, the monotonous food, a surprising sense of community has developed among the third-class passengers. Shared hardship creates bonds that transcend language and culture. People who would never have interacted on land find themselves sharing meals, exchanging small kindnesses, watching each other's children, teaching one another words and songs from their homelands. On the fifth night at sea, someone organizes a talent show in the general room. Performances range from the sublime, an Italian man with an operatic tenor that brings tears to eyes, a young Russian woman whose ballet training is evident in every graceful movement, to the ridiculous, a comedy routine performed by three Swedish brothers that relies on slapstick rather than comprehensible language. You find yourself laughing alongside hundreds of others, momentarily forgetting the confined space, the days yet to travel, the uncertainty waiting on the other side. That night, lying in your narrow berth, listening to the now familiar symphony of sounds that accompany darkness in third class, you reflect on how quickly the human spirit adapts to circumstances. What seemed unbearably confined 5 days ago has become simply the way things are. What felt like imprisonment below the waterline now feels almost like home. A temporary home, yes, but one with its own routines and comforts and community. The ship continues its steady progress westward, carrying its cargo of dreams and hopes and fears across the vast Atlantic. In first class, passengers dance in the grand ballroom, dine on elaborate multi-course meals, stroll the promenade deck in fine clothes. In second class, travelers enjoy modest comforts and respectable accommodations. And here, in third class, deep in the bowels of the ship, hundreds of souls wait patiently for their chance at a new beginning, enduring present discomforts for future possibilities. You close your eyes, lulled by the gentle rocking of the ship, by the distant thrum of engines that have become as familiar as your own heartbeat. Tomorrow will be another day of sameness, the same routines, the same spaces, the same faces, but each day brings you closer to America, to whatever waits on the other side of this journey. Each night in this narrow berth is one less to endure before reaching your destination. The ship creaks around you, metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes, with the constant pressure of water against the hull. The sound no longer disturbs you as it did those first nights. Instead, it has become a lullaby of sorts, a reminder that you are held within this massive vessel, carried forward by its power and purpose toward the future you've sacrificed so much to reach. Sleep comes, and with it dreams of what awaits in America. Dreams that make this week of confinement below the waterline seem a small price to pay. Dreams worth every penny of that third-class ticket folded carefully in your case beneath the bed. Sunday aboard the Titanic brings a different rhythm to life in third class. The morning begins earlier for those attending religious services. The mood is more subdued. Conversations held in hushed tones, card games and music temporarily set aside in observance of the day's significance. You rise with your cabin mates, performing the now familiar rituals of mourning in the cramped space with practiced efficiency, each man moving in the choreographed pattern that 5 days of proximity has established. Breakfast is simple, but slightly elevated for the day of rest. Eggs appear alongside the usual porridge, and the bread seems fresher, the tea a touch stronger. The dining saloon fills with passengers in their best clothes, which for most means simply their cleanest shirt, perhaps a tie rescued from the bottom of a case, a dress saved specifically for Sundays in this new life they're traveling toward. The Catholic Mass is held first in the general room, the priest from second class performing the familiar rituals in Latin that transcends the babble of languages among the congregants. Later, Protestant services follow, hymns sung in a dozen accents, but united in melody and purpose. Those of other faiths, or no faith at all, respect these observances, keeping activities subdued until the afternoon, when normal patterns of socializing gradually resume. The day passes slowly, marked by meals and small conversations, by quiet games of chess and checkers, by letters written home describing the journey thus far. You spend an hour in the afternoon on the third-class deck, watching the endless procession of waves, noting how the water has changed as the ship has moved further into the North Atlantic, darker now, grayer, with white caps that suggest increasing wind, though the Titanic's bulk hardly seems affected by it. The air has grown noticeably colder. Your breath forms visible clouds when you exhale. The few other passengers braving the deck wrap coats tightly around themselves, turn collars up against the chill wind. One man points wordlessly to something in the distance, the unmistakable shape of an iceberg on the horizon, pale against the darkening sky. Others gather to look, murmuring in various languages. None seem concerned, merely curious at this first sighting of ice on the journey. The Titanic continues its steady progress westward, the distant ice seemingly inconsequential against the ship's power and purpose. Dinner that evening is the most substantial meal since boarding: roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, potatoes and vegetables, apple tart for dessert. The dining saloon hums with conversation, with the clatter of cutlery against plates, with occasional laughter. The mood is lighter than this morning, passengers perhaps sensing that they've passed the halfway point of their journey, that each hour brings them closer to New York Harbor, to Ellis Island, to whatever new lives await them on American soil. After dinner, some passengers return to their cabins, others to the general room, where music begins, despite the day, quieter than usual, but present nonetheless. A group gathers around one man, reading aloud from a newspaper purchased before boarding, sharing days-old news from the world left behind. Children play quieter games in corners, watched over by mothers who converse in the universal language of gesture and expression when words fail. The hours of evening pass with the same measured pace as every night aboard ship. You find yourself in a conversation with a Lebanese family, the father practicing his limited English, you learning a few words of Arabic in exchange. The children demonstrate a game played with small stones and a drawn circle, laughing delightedly when you attempt it, and fail spectacularly. For a few hours, the confined space below the waterline expands through human connection, through shared smiles and effortful communication across cultural divides. You return to your cabin earlier than usual, fatigue settling into your bones from the cold air on deck, from the emotional weight of another day suspended between worlds. Your cabin mates are already there, preparing for sleep in the established pattern, the German reading his Bible, the Russian drinking the last of his vodka, the Irish brothers conversing quietly in their native tongue. You claim your middle berth, removing shoes and outer clothes, settling onto the thin mattress that has, remarkably, begun to feel familiar after 6 nights aboard. Sleep comes quickly, your body lulled by the now routine motion of the ship by the white noise of engines that never cease, by the soft sounds of your cabin mates breathing in the darkness. Your dreams are fragmented, images of New York pieced together from photographs seen in brochures, faces of family left behind, workplaces imagined but not yet seen. America hovers just beyond reach, a promise of something better waiting at the end of this journey through darkness and water. You wake suddenly, unsure what has disturbed your sleep. The cabin remains dark, your cabin mates still slumbering in their berths. You lie still, listening, trying to identify what pulled you from unconsciousness. The ship continues its forward motion. The engines maintain their steady rhythm, but something feels different. A change in vibration perhaps, subtle but perceptible to senses that have grown attuned to the Titanic's normal patterns over the past 6 days. The sudden change comes at 11:40 p.m. Though you have no way of knowing the precise time. A shudder runs through the ship, not violent, not alarming, but unmistakable. A grinding sensation that seems to travel the length of the vessel, felt rather than heard. The vibration of the engines changes pitch, then ceases entirely, leaving an eerie silence that feels wrong after days of constant mechanical background noise. Your cabin mates stir, murmuring questions in their various languages. The German sits up, striking a match to light the small lamp beside his bunk. The Russian swears quietly, reaching for his boots, as if by instinct. The Irish brothers exchange words too rapid for you to catch their meaning, but their tone carries concern. "What was that?" one of them asks in English, the question directed at all of you, and none of you. There are no answers, only shared looks of uncertainty. The silence stretches for long minutes, broken only by the sounds of men dressing, of feet hitting the floor, of questions repeated in multiple languages. Then the engines start again, their familiar vibration returning, and collective relief passes through the small cabin. "It's something maybe," the Russian suggests in his limited English, making a gesture with his hands to indicate collision. "Not serious." The German nods, saying something that sounds reassuring though you don't understand the words. He returns to his bunk, reaching again for his Bible. The Irish brothers hesitate, then follow suit, though they continue their hushed conversation. You remain sitting upright, a nameless anxiety settling in your stomach, despite the resumed operation of the engines. Minutes pass. The corridor outside your cabin comes alive with sounds of movement, of doors opening, of voices calling questions. One of the Irish brothers opens your door, peering out. "Everyone's up," he reports. "Something's happening." The 5 of you join the growing number of passengers in the corridor, most in night clothes or partially dressed, confusion evident on every face. No crew members are visible to provide information or instructions. The babble of languages intensifies as people seek answers from one another, theories spreading rapidly, everything from minor mechanical trouble to collision with another vessel. A steward appears finally, moving briskly through the corridor. "Nothing to concern yourselves with," he announces, voice raised to be heard over the questions being called out in a dozen tongues. "A small matter, being attended to by the crew. Please return to your cabins." Few comply. The uncertainty is too great, the disruption too significant to be dismissed so easily. Small groups begin moving through the corridors, seeking information, looking for other crew members who might provide more detailed explanations. You follow the Irish brothers, the German and Russian close behind, navigating the now familiar maze of E-deck toward the central staircase that leads upward. The atmosphere shifts subtly as you move through the ship. Passengers from other sections of third class join your group, swelling the numbers. Women clutch children close to them. Men adopt protective stances. The mood isn't panic, not yet, but rather a collective wariness, an instinctual recognition that something is wrong beyond what that lone steward admitted. At the staircase leading up to D deck, you encounter the first sign of what's to come. A crew member stands at the bottom, arms folded, expression set. "Return to your cabins," he says firmly. When your group approaches, captain's orders. Everything is under control. What happened? Someone calls from the back of your group. What did we hit? Nothing to concern yourselves with. The crew member repeats, the phrase identical to the steward's earlier statement, suggesting a prepared response rather than genuine information. "Please return to your cabins and await further instructions." The Irish brothers exchange glances, then turn away, motioning for you to follow. Instead of returning to your cabin, they lead your small group through a different corridor, seeking another staircase. You find it unattended and ascend quickly to D deck, where the atmosphere is noticeably different. Crew members move with greater urgency here, their expressions belying the calm they've attempted to project to the passengers below. A stewardess hurries past, arms full of life jackets. She stops when she sees your group, surprise evident on her face. "You shouldn't be up here," she says, but her tone lacks conviction. She glances at the life jackets in her arms, then back at your faces. Something in her expression shifts. "They should be getting these to you," she says, voice lowered. "They should be telling you." "Telling us what?" the German asks, his English better than you realized. The stewardess hesitates, then thrusts the life jackets toward you. "Take these. Get up to the boat deck, if you can. We've hit ice. An iceberg. The ship is taking on water." The revelation lands like a physical blow. Taking on water. The words echo in your mind as their implications unfold. The Titanic, this massive vessel of steel, this floating city that was supposed to be unsinkable, is damaged, vulnerable. Suddenly the depth at which third class is located takes on new significance. You are below the waterline, have been the entire journey, but that fact carries different weight now. Word spreads rapidly among the growing crowd of third-class passengers gathering on D deck. The stewardess's information, combined with the visible activities of crew members, paints a picture far different from the "nothing to concern yourselves with" message delivered earlier. People begin moving with more purpose, seeking routes upward, gathering possessions, families drawing closer together. Another crew member appears, this one more authoritative than the last. "All passengers return to your cabins," he calls out, voice cutting through the murmurs of concern. "Life jackets will be distributed. This is merely a precaution. The ship has suffered minor damage that is being addressed." "Far minor," challenges one of the Irish brothers. "Minor enough that women are crying up there." He gestures toward the upper decks, where sounds of distress are indeed audible. "Minor enough that you're passing out life vests." The crew member's expression hardens. "Return to your cabins immediately," he repeats, "or I'll have you escorted there." The threat hangs in the air, ineffective against the growing understanding of your situation. More third-class passengers arrive from below, crowding the narrow space of D deck. Information passes from person to person, translated into a dozen languages, each version slightly altered, increasingly urgent. The iceberg, the damage, the water coming in, the need to get to the upper decks. Your group continues moving upward, ignoring the crew members' instructions, following corridors that grow increasingly unfamiliar. You pass through areas designated for second-class passengers, the difference in accommodations immediately apparent. Wider corridors, more ornate fixtures, cabin doors spaced further apart, suggesting larger rooms beyond. The contrast between these spaces and the cramped conditions you've endured for a week is stark, made more so by the current circumstances. Progress becomes more difficult as you ascend. More crew members block pathways, their instructions becoming commands, their expressions shifting from professional calm to visible stress as the minutes pass. At one junction, steel gates block the corridor, barriers that have always separated the classes, but now represent something far more ominous. They're locked, a crew member standing guard on the other side, refusing to open them despite the growing crowd of third-class passengers gathering before them. Bunnymen and children are being loaded into lifeboats. Someone reports the information having made its way down from the boat deck. First class, first, then second. They haven't called for third yet. The news spreads like fire through dry brush, igniting fear and anger in equal measure. Fathers lift small children, pressing them forward toward the gates, calling out in various languages for them to be allowed through. Women with infants in arms plead with the impassive crew member on the other side. The pressure of bodies increases as more passengers arrive from below, drawn by the same instinct for survival that has brought you this far. Time becomes difficult to track in the windowless corridors of the ship. Minutes stretch and compress, marked only by increasing desperation, by the gradual understanding that the situation is far more serious than initially suggested. Someone has a pocket watch. It's past midnight now, April 15th rather than the 14th. The Titanic has been taking on water for more than half an hour, the damage clearly more severe than the minor description offered earlier. A new sound becomes audible, distant but unmistakable. The ship's distress rockets being fired from the boat deck, their percussive reports echoing through the steel corridors. Each blast confirms what many have already realized. The Titanic is in genuine peril, sending signals of distress into the night sky, calling for help from any vessel within range. The gates remain locked, the crew member guarding them increasingly uneasy as the crowd's desperation grows. Arguments break out among the passengers, some advocating patience and order, others demanding action. A group of men begins testing the strength of the gates, gripping the bars and pulling. The metal holds firm. Another group searches for alternative routes upward, disappearing down side corridors, only to return minutes later, reporting similar barriers elsewhere. He noticed something alarming, a subtle but perceptible tilt to the floor beneath your feet. The ship is developing a list, slight but unmistakable, the bow dipping lower than the stern. The angle is minimal, noticeable, only because you've grown attuned to the normal level position maintained through 6 days at sea. This new orientation confirms what the distress rockets already suggested. The damage is severe, the danger real and increasing. Word passes through the crowd that some third-class passengers have found routes to the upper decks, service stairways used by crew, alternate pathways not blocked by gates. Small groups begin breaking away, following rumors of these escape routes, families struggling to stay together in the increasingly chaotic conditions. You follow one such group, led by a young man who claims to have worked on passenger ships before, who speaks with certainty about the layout of vessels like the Titanic. The route takes you through narrow service corridors, never meant for passenger use. The spaces are utilitarian, pipes running along ceilings, bare bulbs providing minimal light, floors of plain metal, rather than the linoleum of passenger areas. You climb narrow stairways, pass through storage rooms filled with linens and supplies, encounter crew members who sometimes attempt to stop your progress, sometimes step aside with expressions of resignation or even assistance. Each level you ascend reveals a ship in increasing states of alarm. On sea deck, second-class passengers move with purpose toward the boat deck, crew members providing directions, distributing life jackets, maintaining order. The contrast with the situation you've just left is striking. Here information flows freely, instructions are clear, the path to potential safety obvious and unobstructed. You emerge finally onto the open boat deck, the cold night air hitting your lungs like a physical shock after the close atmosphere below. The scene before you appears ordered but urgent, crew members preparing lifeboats, officers calling out instructions, passengers gathered in groups corresponding to their class and status. The night is clear, stars painfully bright in the black sky. The sea is visible beyond the railing, flat and dark, deceptively peaceful. In the distance, the unmistakable shape of icebergs dot the horizon, pale ghosts floating on the black water. The ship's list is more pronounced here in the open air, the slight tilt visible in the way water sloshes in glasses, in the way passengers adjust their stance to maintain balance. The bow sits noticeably lower than when you took your afternoon walk on the third-class deck. The evidence is undeniable now. The Titanic is sinking, taking on water faster than its pumps can expel it, its compartments flooding one by one from whatever damage that brief shudder caused nearly an hour ago. Women and children first, comes the call from officers supervising the loading of lifeboats. Women and children only at this time. You watch as families are separated, mothers and young children guided toward the boats, fathers and older sons held back with assurances that there will be room for them later, in other boats not yet prepared. The goodbyes are brief, stunned, many clearly believing the separation temporary, a precautionary measure only. Others seem to understand the truth more clearly, their farewells more final, more desperate. Time continues its strange elasticity, stretching and compressing, minutes feeling like hours, then events accelerating without warning. More third-class passengers arrive on deck, emerging through the same service routes your group discovered, or finally released from the gates below that have apparently opened in response to the increasingly obvious danger. The faces show the same confusion and fear you feel. Many still in night clothes, some carrying small bundles of possessions, children clutching toys or blankets, everyone seeking information, direction, reassurance that grows increasingly scarce as the night progresses. The loading of lifeboats continues with a procedure that seems orderly at first glance, but reveals its flaws upon closer observation. Some boats are lowered half full, space that could hold more passengers left empty due to fears about capacity, about structural integrity, about the mechanics of lowering fully loaded boats from their davits. Officers call repeatedly for women and children, but communication failures mean that many from third class haven't received the message, remain below decks, awaiting instructions that will never come. You find yourself standing with a group of men, mostly from third class, watching helplessly as another lifeboat is lowered toward the black water below. The ship's band has begun playing on the first-class section of the boat deck, light, cheerful music that creates a surreal counterpoint to the increasingly desperate situation. The incongruity strikes you as both absurd and strangely moving, this insistence on civilization's forms even as the trappings of civilization sink beneath your feet. The temperature continues to drop as the night deepens. Your breath forms clouds in the air. Your fingers grow numb, despite being thrust deep in pockets. Many passengers, particularly those from third class, who came up without time to dress properly, visibly suffer in the frigid air. Some crew members distribute blankets, but there aren't enough for everyone. Children cry from cold and fear. Parents attempt comfort while their own faces betray the same emotions. The Titanic's bow sinks lower with each passing minute, the angle of the deck increasing incrementally but perceptibly. Walking forward requires leaning into the slope. Walking aft means fighting against gravity's pull. Water is visible now at the forward sections of the ship, black and implacable, swallowing the forecastle bit by bit. The crew's movements become more urgent, their calls more insistent, as they try to fill the remaining lifeboats. Any more women and children? The call echoes across the deck, officers scanning the crowds with increasing desperation. Some men step back, revealing women who have remained hidden in the confusion. Others begin calculating odds, eyeing the remaining boats, the number of passengers still aboard, the steadily increasing tilt of the deck. The mathematics is simple and brutal. There are not enough lifeboats for everyone. More than half of those currently standing on the Titanic's decks will not find space in the small fleet of wooden vessels being lowered one by one into the freezing Atlantic. You watch as a lifeboat filled with third-class passengers is finally lowered, women clutching children, their faces showing the same stunned disbelief visible on every face tonight. They look up as they descend, eyes seeking family members left behind, hands reach toward each other across increasing distance. Words of comfort or farewell are called out, carried away by the cold wind before reaching their intended recipients. The boat reaches the water, oars are deployed, and it begins moving slowly away from the sinking ship, a small island of potential salvation in a sea of certain death. The band continues playing as the last lifeboats are prepared. Their music has changed, slower now, more somber, a hymn, recognizable, despite your limited familiarity with such things. Nearer, my God, to thee, someone nearby whispers, the words carrying unintended but unmistakable significance in this moment. The musicians play on, their commitment to their art, to providing comfort, to maintaining some semblance of order, striking in its quiet dignity. The final lifeboat is loaded primarily with children. Small bodies passed hand over hand from the deck to the swaying boat. A crew member counts heads, calls for more, room for 2 more, he announces. A woman is guided forward, a baby in her arms. 1 more. The call comes. Eyes scan the remaining crowd. No more women step forward. The officer in charge hesitates, then points to a young man standing nearby, barely more than a boy himself, perhaps 16 or 17. You, he says, get in. The boat is lowered, disappearing into the darkness below, leaving hundreds still standing on the sloping deck. The truth settles around those who remain like the cold itself, penetrating, inescapable, paralyzing. There will be no more lifeboats. There will be no more opportunities to leave the ship before it completes its inexorable descent into the North Atlantic. Whatever happens next, they will face it here, on these decks. As the Titanic continues its transformation from miracle of modern engineering to maritime disaster, unprecedented in scope and scale. Some passengers move toward the stern, instinctively seeking the highest point as the bow continues to sink. Others remain where they are, perhaps struggling to accept the reality of their situation, perhaps simply unsure what action to take when all actions lead to the same outcome. Small groups form and dissolve, family members finding each other in the chaos, strangers drawn together by shared language, or simply human need for connection in extremity. You find yourself moving aft with the general flow of remaining passengers, your mind simultaneously processing too much and too little. Individual thoughts surface and submerge rapid succession, regret for the unfinished letter in your pocket, wonder about what will happen to your body, gratitude that your family isn't here to share this fate, anger at the locked gates below, the half-empty boats, the shortage of lifeboats that sealed your fate before you ever stepped aboard. The ship's lights remain burning, power still flowing through the vessel, despite the flooding in its lower compartments. The electricity creates an island of illumination in the vast darkness of the Atlantic night. visible for miles in all directions. Above, the stars continue their cold, distant observation of human tragedy. Below, the water rises inexorably, claiming more of the ship with each passing minute. The band has stopped playing, its members disappearing into the crowd of those awaiting the inevitable. The sound reaches you, a deep, ominous groan, emanating from the very structure of the ship itself, metal under stress, bulkheads failing, the death cry of a vessel never designed to withstand the forces now tearing it apart. The sound is felt as much as heard, vibrating through the deck, beneath your feet, through the soles of your shoes, through your bones themselves. The angle of the deck increases suddenly, no longer a gentle slope, but a distinct tilt that makes standing difficult. People stumble, reach for railings, for each other. Objects begin sliding, deck chairs, forgotten luggage, anything not secured. They gather at the lowest points, creating obstacles to movement, hazards in the increasingly chaotic environment. A woman near you loses her footing, would have fallen if not for the quick reaction of a man who catches her arm, steadies her against his side. Water is visible at the base of the first funnel now, having claimed the bridge and all of the forecastle. The sight defies comprehension. This ship that seemed a floating city, impervious to the elements, is being consumed by the very ocean it was built to conquer. The black water reflects the ship's lights as it advances, a mirror showing two Titanics, one solid, though failing, one fluid, ephemeral, an inverted reflection that grows as its original diminishes. Prayer becomes audible among the remaining passengers, Catholic rosaries recited in Italian and Irish accents, Protestant hymns sung by small groups clinging to each other, Hebrew prayers offered by Jewish passengers, Islamic supplications intoned with quiet dignity. The languages differ, but the essence remains the same. Appeals to divine mercy in the face of imminent death, final communications with whatever god or gods might be listening on this clear, cold night in the middle of the North Atlantic. The first funnel collapses without warning, the massive structure tearing free of its moorings as the angle of the ship increases beyond what its supports can withstand. It falls forward with terrible majesty, crushing those unfortunate enough to be in its path, creating a massive wave when it hits the advancing water. The sound is deafening, tearing metal, shearing rivets, the impact of tons of steel against the implacable ocean. For a moment everyone freezes, stunned by this new development, this fresh horror added to an already unbearable situation. Movement resumes almost immediately, more urgent now, more desperate. The ship's remaining time can be measured in minutes rather than hours. The stern continues to rise as the bow descends further, the angle approaching 45 degrees, making movement increasingly difficult. People climb rather than walk, using railings, fixtures, anything that offers handholds. Those unable to climb remain where they fell, resigned or simply exhausted beyond the capacity for further effort. You've reached the stern section, as far aft as possible, clinging to a railing as the deck continues its inexorable tilt toward vertical. Around you, others do the same, strangers from a dozen countries, united now in this final extremity. Someone begins reciting the Lord's Prayer in English. Voices join in various languages, the familiar cadence recognizable even when the words aren't. The prayer continues, repeated when it reaches its end, becoming a mantra against fear, against the cold, against the looming certainty of what comes next. The lights flicker, dim, return to brightness, then dim again. The ship's electrical systems are failing as water reaches the generators. Darkness threatens, not the natural darkness of night, which at least contains stars and the promising line of the horizon, but the absolute blackness of a sinking ship in the middle of the ocean. Illumination extinguished, along with the lives of those who remain aboard. Another grinding sound comes from deep within the vessel. Metal giving way, structures failing, the ship literally breaking under the stresses placed upon its hull. The sensation is physical, a shudder that runs through every remaining part of the Titanic, felt by every person still clinging to its rapidly tilting decks. For a moment, the movement seems to pause, the bow's descent arrested, the stern's rise halted. A breath of impossible hope moves through the crowd. Then reality reasserts itself with terrible finality. The ship breaks. There is no other way to describe it. The single entity that was the RMS Titanic becomes two separate pieces, the bow already mostly submerged, now detaching completely to begin its long descent to the ocean floor, the stern momentarily free, bobbing slightly higher with the sudden release of the bow's weight before beginning its own inevitable plunge. The lights go out, darkness falls complete and absolute, broken only by the stars above and the occasional flare of a match or cigarette lighter as individuals make small, futile gestures against the overwhelming blackness. The sounds intensify in the darkness, prayers continuing, crying more audible without visual distractions, the ongoing destruction of the ship itself as everything not secured breaks free, crashes into other objects, into people, into the rising water. The stern section rights itself briefly after separating from the bow, a cruel moment of false hope, of apparent equilibrium quickly shattered as water rushes into the newly exposed front section. The descent resumes, the angle increasing again, steeper than before, approaching vertical in the final minutes. Those still alive cling to whatever they can grasp, to each other, fighting gravity's pull toward the waiting water below. Someone near you begins singing a hymn again, "Abide with me," the words barely audible above the sounds of destruction, but the melody clear, haunting in its simple dignity. Others join, voice by voice, the song spreading like a small flame, passed from candle to candle in a darkened church. The singing continues as the stern section makes its final movements, righting itself utterly vertical for a few seconds, hanging suspended as if in tribute to human engineering and ambition, before beginning its final plunge toward the ocean floor 2 miles below. The water, when it comes, is beyond cold, a temperature that transcends physical sensation and becomes something else entirely, a force rather than a feeling, death made liquid and immediate. It steals breath, stops thought, reduces existence to a single, overwhelming imperative: survive. But survival is impossible in water this cold. The human body cannot function. Consciousness extends only minutes in these conditions, life perhaps half an hour for the stronger swimmers, the most resilient constitutions. Around you, people fight instinctively against the inevitable, thrashing, gasping, seeking anything that floats, that might offer a few more minutes of life. The surface of the ocean around the sinking stern becomes a chaos of struggling bodies, of makeshift rafts created from deck chairs and cabin doors, of voices calling for help that cannot come. Gradually, the sounds diminish, movements slowing as hypothermia claims its victims, voices falling silent as strength fails, as the cold penetrates to bone and blood and brain. The ocean returns to stillness, the screams fade to moans, to whispers, to silence. The surface of the water becomes a graveyard of floating debris and floating bodies, some still alive, most beyond help. The lifeboats, visible in the distance as small, dark shapes against the slightly less dark water, do not return. Their occupants hear the cries, debate the moral calculus of rescue attempts, ultimately choose self-preservation over heroism. They cannot be blamed. A full boat attempting rescue would likely capsize, trading certain survival for probable death. The cold continues its work. Those still alive feel its progress through their bodies. First the pain of extremities burning with cold, then the blessed numbness as nerve endings surrender, then the creeping lethargy as core temperature drops, as blood retreats from surface vessels, as consciousness begins to fragment into non-sequential moments, dreamlike states that presage the final surrender to the inevitable. You float, suspended between ocean and sky, between life and what comes after. The stars wheel slowly overhead, indifferent to human tragedy. The water holds you in its frigid embrace, patient in its certainty, generous in the numbness it provides, before taking what it must. Your thoughts move slowly, disjointedly, images of home, fragments of prayers remembered from childhood, regrets for what might have been, gratitude that consciousness will end before the fish find you. The third-class ticket that brought you here is still in your coat pocket, now soaked with salt water, the ink running, the paper disintegrating like the dreams it represented. Southampton to New York, the journey never completed, the destination never reached. One of over 1,500 similar stories ending in these waters tonight, most from third class, from the depths of the ship, where gates remained locked too long, where information came too late, where the mathematics of survival calculated different values for different lives. The cold reaches your center. Consciousness flickers like the ship's lights before they failed. The stars above blur, sharpen, blur again. Your heartbeat slows. Your breathing becomes shallow, irregular. The pain has gone completely now, replaced by a strange floating sensation that might be peace, or might simply be the final stage before oblivion. The Titanic is gone. The unsinkable ship resting now on the ocean floor, its grand staircase collapsed, its luxurious appointments ruined, its class distinctions rendered meaningless by catastrophic failure and universal mortality. The ocean continues its patient work, the stars continue their distant observation, the night continues its slow progression toward a dawn that many will not see. In lifeboats scattered across miles of open water, survivors huddle together, pray for rescue, watch for ships that might respond to the Titanic's final distress signals. On the surface where the ship went down, the evidence of disaster gradually disperses, debris carried by currents, bodies surrendering to the laws of physics, and beginning their own descent to join the vessel that brought them this far and no farther. Your awareness narrows to a single point of light, a star directly overhead, its cold fire the last thing you perceive, as individual identity dissolves, as the boundary between self and ocean blurs, as what began in Southampton ends here, in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, your story becoming one with the larger narrative of the Titanic, a cautionary tale of human hubris and natural forces, of technology's limitations and nature's indifference, of dreams that end in ice and darkness, and the long silence that follows, darkness, complete, absolute, not the darkness of night, which contains stars and moon and the promise of eventual dawn, but the darkness of the ocean depths, where light has never penetrated, where the sun is a concept without meaning. This is the darkness that now surrounds what remains of the RMS Titanic, broken into two primary sections, surrounded by a field of debris that was once furniture, luggage, china, and the thousand small items that constituted daily life aboard a luxury liner. The bow section, still recognizable as the proud vessel that departed Southampton 6 days earlier, rests upright on the ocean floor, its sleek lines now draped in rusticles, iron-eating bacteria forming reddish-brown stalactites that hang from the hull like a macabre decoration. The grand staircase has collapsed, the wood consumed by organisms that thrive in these crushing depths. The famous dome above it is gone, the glass having shattered during the descent or in the impact with the bottom. The corridors that once echoed with footsteps and voices now stand silent, filled with the same cold water that fills the lungs of those who couldn't reach the lifeboats. The stern section lies 1/3 of a mile away, having taken a more traumatic journey to the bottom. It landed with greater force, collapsing inward under its own weight and the pressure of the water above. It bears less resemblance to its original form, a crumpled approximation of what was once the aft section of the grandest ship of its era. Between these two primary pieces stretches a debris field, a carpet of objects, both large and small, that rain down during the 2-hour descent, settling according to their weight and water resistance, creating a map of tragedy, readable by those who understand such things. Here in this eternally dark, eternally cold place, 2 miles below the surface, where pressure would crush a human body instantly, the Titanic has found its final berth. No harbors, no passengers, no destinations remain for this ship that once represented the pinnacle of human achievement and ambition. Only stillness, only waiting, only the slow, patient consumption of its materials by the ocean and its inhabitants. The water at this depth is still, undisturbed by the currents that move the surface miles above. Nothing stirs except the microscopic organisms that feed on the ship's remains and the occasional deep-sea creature that passes through, unimpressed by this human artifact in their domain. Time passes differently here, not in minutes or hours, but in decades and centuries, processes unfolding with glacial slowness, the transformation from ship to seabed occurring increment by imperceptible increment. In the first-class staterooms, where the wealthy once slept on fine linens and were attended by personal valets and maids, luxury items remain: hairbrushes on vanities, clothing in wardrobes, jewelry boxes containing gems that will never again catch the light. These rooms tell stories of interrupted lives, of journeys uncompleted, of returns never made to waiting families. The salt water has preserved some materials while destroying others, creating a tableau of partial remembrance, of selective obliteration. The mast-like telegraph cables still reach upward from the radio room, though the messages they once transmitted, including the distress calls that brought the Carpathia to rescue the survivors, have long since dissipated into the ether. The equipment inside, state-of-the-art in 1912, now seems primitive, quaint, its brass fittings dulled by the chemical processes of deep ocean conservation. The messages sent from this room changed maritime law forever, made wireless telegraphy mandatory for all passenger vessels, saved lives on ships not yet built, not yet imagined. The third-class sections of the ship, where you spent your final days, have suffered their own unique patterns of deterioration. The simpler construction, the utilitarian materials, the narrower spaces have collapsed in on themselves, in many places, creating a labyrinth even more confusing than the one you attempted to navigate during those final hours. The bunks where you slept, the dining saloon where you ate, the general room where music played and brief community formed, all remain, transformed, but recognizable to those who know what to look for. Bodies are absent. They drifted away during the long descent, or were consumed by the ocean's scavengers before the ship reached the bottom. Only shoes remain in pairs on the seabed, the leather and stronger materials outlasting the flesh and bone they once protected, marking the resting places of individuals without preserving their forms. These silent witnesses dot the debris field, each pair a monument to a life lost, each positioning telling a story of their final moments that no one remains to interpret correctly. The ship's massive engines, once the pride of Harland and Wolff's engineering department, lie exposed where the hull broke apart, their complicated machinery now still, silent, slowly converting to rust under the relentless chemical assault of salt water. The giant propellers remain attached to their shafts, frozen in position, never again to churn the waters of the North Atlantic, never again to drive this vessel toward a destination it failed to reach. They emerge from the stern section like artifacts from another civilization, which in some ways they are, products of an innocence and confidence ended forever by the very disaster that brought them to this resting place. In the cargo holds, remnants remain of the various goods being transported to America, bolts of fabric now rotted away, cases of champagne with the liquid long since mingled with the sea, manufacturing equipment destined for factories that found other suppliers when their orders failed to arrive, and in one special secured room, the mailbags containing thousands of letters, communications that would never reach their intended recipients, words of love and business and daily life suspended forever between sender and receiver, their ink dissolved, their paper transformed to sludge, their messages lost to the crushing void of the deep ocean. Time passes. In the darkness, years accumulate. The disaster that put the Titanic on this seabed fades from immediate memory to historical footnote to legend. The survivors age, tell their stories, eventually die of causes unrelated to that April night. The ships that fail to respond to distress signals continue their own journeys until they too are replaced by newer vessels, scrapped or lost to other maritime incidents, less famous, but no less final for those involved. The sea remains, remembering nothing, forgetting nothing, simply continuing as it has for billions of years before humans first conceived of crossing it. 73 years after the sinking, human eyes finally gaze upon the Titanic again. A joint French-American expedition locates the wreck using sophisticated sonar equipment and deep-sea exploration technology unavailable in 1912. Remote cameras descend into the darkness, illuminating for the first time since its sinking the ghostly remains of what was once the largest movable object on Earth. The images they capture, the bow emerging from the gloom, the railing still intact, the crow's nest where the lookout first spotted the iceberg, become famous worldwide, reigniting interest in a disaster that had begun to fade from collective memory. More expeditions follow. Scientists, historians, filmmakers, treasure hunters, all descend in increasingly sophisticated submersibles to document, study, and in some cases remove artifacts from the wreck site. These visitors bring light to the eternal darkness, noise to the eternal silence, human presence to a place defined by its absence. They come and go, while the Titanic remains, indifferent to their attention, continuing its slow dissolution into the seabed. The recovered artifacts tour the world in exhibitions, china plates with the White Star Line logo, still visible, jewelry boxes containing necklaces and rings, a child's marble, a leather satchel, bottles of champagne never consumed, currency from a dozen countries, a clarinet that might have been played by the band as the ship sank. These objects, removed from their resting place, become touchstones for a new generation, fascinated by the disaster, connecting past to present through physical items that survived when their owners did not. In Belfast, where the ship was built, a museum rises on the grounds of the former Harland and Wolff shipyard. In Southampton, where it departed on its maiden and only voyage, memorials list the names of those lost. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, where many of the recovered bodies were buried, cemeteries maintain sections dedicated to Titanic victims, some identified, others known only by a number assigned when they were pulled from the sea. In 100 less obvious locations, family homes, private collections, small-town historical societies, mementos of the disaster are preserved, remembered, passed from one generation to the next. The story evolves with each telling, with each new discovery, with each generation that encounters it. The basic facts remain unchanged. The collision with an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, the insufficient number of lifeboats, the approximately 1,500 lives lost in the freezing North Atlantic, but the interpretation shifts with the cultural lens of each era. Heroism, hubris, class division, gender roles, corporate responsibility, engineering failure, natural disaster, all these aspects receive greater or lesser emphasis depending on who is telling the story and when. Through it all, the wreck itself continues its slow return to elemental components. Marine scientists calculate that the recognizable remains of the Titanic will disappear completely within decades, consumed by the rusticles that feed on its iron, collapsed by the inexorable pressure of the deep, dispersed by the subtle currents that move even at these depths. Nothing of the ship that once transported dreams and ambitions across the Atlantic will remain, except perhaps its less degradable contents, ceramic items, some metals, glass artifacts, too covered in sediment to be visible. And what of the passengers? What of you, whose journey ended in those freezing waters? Physical remains are gone, bodies either recovered in the days after the sinking and buried ashore, or long since dispersed by the ocean's processes. But something remains, not a soul in the religious sense, nor a ghost as superstition would have it, but the impression of lives lived and ended, of hopes sustained and extinguished, of last moments faced with varying combinations of courage, fear, resignation, and disbelief. This impression lingers around the wreck site, sensed by those who visit in their submersibles, who hover over the rusted remains and feel something beyond scientific interest or historical curiosity. It exists in the museums where Titanic artifacts are displayed, visitors falling silent before items as simple as a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles or a child's doll recovered from the debris field. It permeates the memorials, the books written about the disaster, the films recreating those final hours, the ongoing fascination with a maritime tragedy that, while not the deadliest or most recent, remains fixed in collective consciousness. Perhaps it is the specific combination of elements that makes the Titanic story resonate across time: the grandeur of the vessel, the confidence of the era it represented, the stark division of passengers by class, the corresponding division of their fates, to the hubris implied in the unsinkable moniker, never officially used, but widely believed, the clarity with which the disaster seems to demarcate the end of one age and the beginning of another. Perhaps it is simply that the narrative contains all the elements of classic tragedy: pride before a fall, warning signs ignored, unavoidable consequences, human dignity in the face of certain death. Or perhaps it is something more fundamental: the universal human fear of dark water, of drowning, of being lost without marker or memorial. The Titanic disaster speaks to primal anxieties, to the recognition that for all our technology and sophistication, we remain vulnerable to forces beyond our control or full understanding. The ocean's depth, its cold, its indifference to human life or achievement, these aspects of the natural world remain as true now as they were in 1912, as they will be for as long as humans venture onto the sea. For you, and for the other third-class passengers who perished that night, there is an additional resonance to the story. Your accommodations on E-deck, below the waterline and furthest from the lifeboats, combined with the delayed warnings and locked gates that prevented timely evacuation, resulted in the highest casualty rate among the three classes of passengers. The stark statistics tell their own story. 62% of first-class passengers survived, 41% of second-class, but only 25% of third-class lived to reach New York on the rescue ship Carpathia. In death, as in life aboard ship, class determined destiny. This aspect of the disaster, the unequal distribution of survival by passenger class, has become central to modern interpretations of the Titanic story. What was accepted as natural order in 1912, that the wealthy and powerful should have first access to limited safety resources, is viewed differently through contemporary lenses. Your story, the story of third class, has moved from footnote to focus as cultural attitudes have shifted regarding social justice, equality, and the value of all human life, regardless of economic status or national origin. In the darkness of the North Atlantic, 2 miles below the surface, where the Titanic makes its final berth, these evolving interpretations have no meaning. There is only the slow, patient process of reclamation of human artifacts returning to their component materials, of organic order reasserting itself over design structure. The bow continues to deteriorate, the stern to collapse further in on itself. The debris field spreads through the action of deep currents and burrowing organisms. The ocean continues its work, indifferent to the significance humans attach to this particular shipwreck among the millions that lie scattered across the world's seabeds. But elsewhere, in museums and classrooms, in books and films, in the imagination of each new generation that encounters the story, the Titanic remains afloat, perpetually departing Southampton with flags flying, perpetually striking ice in the calm, cold night, perpetually slipping beneath the surface as its lights flicker and extinguish. In this continuous retelling, all passengers remain present, the famous first-class travelers whose names and faces are well documented, and the largely anonymous third-class passengers whose individual stories have been lost, but whose collective experience forms an essential part of the narrative. You are there among them still, boarding with your third-class ticket clutched tightly, navigating the narrow corridors of E-deck, sleeping in your cramped berth, eating simple meals in the dining saloon, listening to impromptu music in the general room, standing on the stern as the bow descends into the freezing Atlantic. Your experiences, imagined and reconstructed from historical records, from survivor accounts, from the physical evidence of the ship itself, become part of the collective memory of the disaster. In this way, something survives when bodies do not. The stories we tell, the lessons we derive, the empathy we extend backward through time to those who face circumstances we can imagine but hope never to experience. This remembrance is not the same as living, but it is a form of continuation, of presence that extends beyond physical existence. It is what humans have always done for their dead, carried forward the meaning of lives, ended, integrated individual stories into the larger narrative of human experience. The Titanic continues its slow disintegration on the ocean floor. The passengers who went down with the ship continue their presence in memory and commemoration. The sea continues its eternal cycles, indifferent to both the physical reality of the wreckage and the cultural significance attached to it. And we continue to look back, to imagine, to try to understand what happened in those hours between collision and final submersion, the decisions made, the courage shown, the failures of design and procedure, the triumph of certain human values, even in catastrophic circumstances. In the end, perhaps, that is the true legacy of the Titanic and all who sailed on her, not the rusting remains on the seabed, nor the artifacts in museums, nor even the specific lessons learned that made future sea travel safer, but the ongoing conversation about what matters when facing the ultimate limitation of human existence, about how we treat one another when resources are scarce and time is short, about what we value and what we are willing to sacrifice, about the society we create through our choices, our actions, our recognition or denial of our shared vulnerability and interdependence. Your third-class ticket, purchased with such hope and sacrifice, led not to a new life in America, but to a place in this continuing conversation. Your experience, the crowded conditions, the locked gates, the confusion of those final hours, the cold water that claimed you, has become part of a larger narrative about justice, about equality, about the cost of treating any human life as less valuable than another. In this way, your journey continues long after its apparent end, your presence felt in places you never reached, your story told in languages you never spoke, the quiet below, in the wreck, in the ocean depths, in the final moments of 1,500 lives, ended on a cold April night, speaks with unexpected volume and clarity to those willing to listen. It speaks of human achievement and human limitation, of natural forces beyond our control, of systems that prioritize some lives over others, of courage and cowardice, of luck both good and bad, of endings that become beginnings in the complex tapestry of human memory and meaning-making. In this continuous retelling, in this ongoing examination of what happened and why and what it means, something persists, not life as you knew it, brief and ended too soon, but presence nonetheless, a kind of immortality, not of body, but of significance, a place in the human story that continues as long as there are humans to tell it, to hear it, to find in it something meaningful about their own journey across whatever waters they must navigate. The Titanic rests in darkness, in silence, in the permanent midnight of the deep ocean, but its story, your story, remains in the light, in the realm of words and images and understanding, where the past is never truly past, but continues to inform our present, to shape how we comprehend ourselves and our world, to influence how we build our ships and live our lives and face whatever icebergs loom in the darkness ahead.